Hi gang, the endless horrifying depths of space are very much part of the grim darkness of 40k, but even in the Warhammer galaxy, some bits of space are more horrifying and cold than others, and the next Crusade supplement, Pariah Nexus, is set in them. So let's look back at the last few updates to this storyline and then dive into this one and learn just what these Nexuses are. So, the Pariah Nexus has been a regularly visited plot point in 40k for the last few years, appearing in campaign supplements, Warhammer TV shows and codices, and as a potential site for your tabletop games, and a general spooky eldritch plot point. But with the current Crusade supplement being focused on them, spoiler, them, I thought it would be a good time to go through the story of the Pariah Nexuses, Nexii, what they are, what the story's been so far, and how it develops in this new book. The Pariah Nexus was first introduced as a plot point in 40k in Psychic Awakening, the big story-driving event of 9th edition Warhammer 40,000 back in 2020. After the fall of Cadia and the spread of the Great Rift across the galaxy came a great darkness known to the Imperium as the Noctis Aeterna, where warp travel was difficult and communication impossible. But when the Noctis Aeterna lifted, some areas of the galaxy remained dark, curiously empty of transmissions. The most prominent of these was in the Nephilim sector. Noting this as a potential issue, the Lord Regent of the Imperium, Robute Gilliman, dispatched a task force to the area, Battle Group Khalides, under the command of the pious and stubborn Group Master Moran. And when the battle group arrived near the area, they encountered mass panic. Some systems were in open revolt, people were fleeing nearby planets, wars had broken out as minor Xenos factions and rebel human elements tried to ransack worlds for the resources they needed to make an escape. And the navigators of this fleet soon perceived what everyone was so scared about: a shimmering psychic veil in the warp that covered the core of the sector, but as the battle group pushed onwards through the veil, what they found was nothing. But like, scary nothing. Psykers in the fleet felt like they were choking, drowning, unable to reach for their powers. Warp drives guttered and became unreliable. Anything with even the vaguest connection to the warp lost power, and even non-Psykers were affected. An unsettling sense of wrongness that frayed the sanity and led to malcontent and mutiny. Navigation became difficult along warp routes that were stilled, and no astropathic communication outside the zone was possible. As they landed forces on planets within this Nephilim anomaly, the investigating Astra Militarum soldiers were afflicted with a strange apathy, barely able to complete their investigations into the cities they found. Survivors existed, but lay in the open like glassy-eyed dolls, along with small animals and insects. All were similarly affected by this lethargy, which came to be known as the Stilling. But eventually they discovered the cause. On the world of Mesmok, the battle group encountered the first of many activated Blackstone pylons, defended by Necrons from a swathe of different dynasties. The initial conflict at Mesmok went really badly. The Ultramarines and Black Templars forces were forced to retreat in the face of stubborn Necron resistance, as across the region, now dubbed the Pariah Nexus, Necron assaults inflicted punishing defeats on the battle group. But the Imperials eventually managed to turn the tide under the advice of the Sister of Battle, Ephrael Stern, who convinced Group Master Moran to launch an attack on the ice world of Cherist in the Lomor system, the site of numerous Necron dolmen gates, Necron portals through the webway. The battle was hard. Stern had expected reinforcements from the Inari Eldar, but because of events elsewhere in the galaxy, they never arrived. But eventually the gates were destroyed when the faith of the Sisters proved immune to the numbing effects of the pylons. And just to break the narrative here, this is quite a contentious point in 40k at the moment. In all the Pariah Nexus stories, religious faith works in the Nexus, but psychic or warp phenomenon don't. But in the rest of 40k, it's pretty clear that what humans think of as miracles of faith are actually strong group belief affecting the warp, a relatively common occurrence in 40k. In the very contemporary Dawn of Fire series, this is called out directly. Some custodies watching the Sisters of Battle burn renegade psykers on Gathalamor comment on how ironic it is that the Sisters' miracles are basically the same thing as the powers of the psykers that they're burning. The power of faith in 40k is actually strong will and latent psychic ability affecting the warp, except in the Pariah Nexus plot, where they're totally different things. I assume that by the time we get to the end of this might be resolved in some way, but it is 40k, so who knows? Anyway, the battle at Cherist was something of a turning point for the Imperium. With the destruction of the gates, Necron reinforcements were slowed down, and the battle group went on the offensive, particularly enthused by the discovery that faith could be used as a weapon. The Imperium loved that. Rumours spread about previously catatonic guardsmen being returned to sanity after a good praying at. Even the Mechanicus' belief in the Omnissiah had the same effect, and after a concerted Imperial pushback, the immediate conflict came to a head in the Tredegar system, where Ephrael Stern and the Inquisitor Kyria Draxus led a task force to try and gather data on the pylons in the hopes of figuring out how to destroy them. However, once on the surface, they were ambushed by Illuminor Seras and escaped into the warren of tunnels and Necron machinery below the pylons. Fighting a desperate battle for survival, the Imperial task force managed to recover some of the information they sought, but in the process they released the Catan Shard the Necrons had bound at the heart of the machinery, a rogue element that would then occupy Seras as the Imperial forces made their escape. And that's where the initial segment in Psychic Awakening left the story. Like so much of 40k, midway through a war that you could get involved with too. But this was then built on in various releases over the next couple of years, from the Kill Team Pariah Nexus set to various White Dwarf articles to the 9th edition Beyond the Veil supplement, to Warhammer TV's Pariah Nexus animation, all of which move the story on in various ways. Illuminor Xeras, one of the greatest of the Necron cryptex, was the architect of the strange Necron system that maintained this Pariah Nexus. The contra-immaterial nodal matrix had been a product of the greatest Necron cryptex, including the historically rebellious and shunned technomandrites. Planets had been rearranged, orbits realigned, synthetic singularities created in a network that choked off any connection to the warp. The real nexus of this was the system of Zendu, whose star had been enclosed in a massive noctilith construct. From this point, nodal corridors spread across the interdimensional space of the anomaly, reinforcing its structure, and in the meantime, Seras had engaged in experimentation of his own, capturing and studying the humans of the Nephilim sector in an attempt to find new weapons for his master. Because this wasn't Seras's idea. Illuminor Seras was in the service of the recently returned Silent King of the Necrons, Sarek, and the Pariah Nexus was one part of his grand plan, which I will summarize here. Sarek, former ruler of the Necrons and last active during the War in Heaven against the Old Ones millions of years ago, had seen the intergalactic horror of the approaching Tyranids in the space between galaxies and returned to reawaken and reunite the Necrons. The Necrons are famously not fans of the warp and of warp power. That was a really big theme of the War in Heaven, so he wants to find a way to cut off the younger species from this, render them docile, and take over, unifying the Necrons, defeating the Tyranids, and using the younger species in experiments to achieve his ultimate goal of reversing the biotransference that turned the Necrons into robots all those years ago. So, Sarek arrived in the Nephilim sector to be met by Seras, thousands of Triarch Praetorians, legions of awakened Necrons from his own Sarekan dynasty, and a gift of captured human blanks who were carted off to probably become their own sort of ancient threat from the depths of time. Many Necron pharaons and their dynasties had pledged to him, and together they staged a massive counteroffensive across the sector, pushing back Imperial forces in a wave of defeats, including, when Sarek himself took to the field, the occasional destroyed planet. But while the Necrons were resurgent, their planning was hampered by a number of factors. The dynasty's pledge to Sarek fought for his favour, leading to occasions where Necrons fought other Necrons to expand their own spheres of influence or to expand the territories of their own dynasties. Other players were drawn in by the war. Orican the Diviner, former court astronomer, led forces at Vantis III, and Trazyn the Infinite was suspected to be active in the area, stealing away items for his collection, all of which played hell with the battle plans of the Silent King. And those wouldn't be the only internal struggles that plagued the Necrons' plans for domination, because at this point, Crusade Pariah Nexus continues the story. Through all of this, the Imperial forces had been pushed back, but Group Master Moran refused to leave. The Imperials had discovered another battle group, Orpheus, struggling through the zone even as the boundaries of the Nexus spread further, and while the Imperium were on the back foot, the reinforcements provided the opportunity to consolidate. It was the Imperial Fists who suggested the next plan of action. The victory at Cherist was central to this new Imperial faith, and largely it had been ignored since the Dolmen Gates were destroyed. The Imperial Fist's librarians suggested the enactment on Cherist of a psychic ritual in an attempt to break through the stilling effects of the Nexus, send a distress signal, and call for reinforcements. The Imperial fleet was beset on all sides, barely able to keep track of its own armies as astrotelepathy failed again, and its forces were embroiled against the Necrons on hundreds of fronts, and so Marshal Arnulf of the Black Templars and Lieutenant Stornvor of the Fists led their forces in a wide swathe across nearby space to secure Cherist and the Lomor system. The push was grueling. The cordon around Lomor was forced back many times, with strike forces of Marines running dry of ammo and fighting hand to hand across all sorts of terrain, but it held, and the ritual completed, though, of course, no one currently in the Pariah Nexus could be sure if it had been heard. But don't worry, it had been. Far away and coordinating multiple battlefronts across the galaxy, Robert Guilliman was unable to personally intervene, at least not yet. But he was able to assemble reinforcements, a new fleet commanded by Group Master Vicrayan and by one of his most trusted lieutenants, Belisarius Call. This battle group Hephaestus would provide reinforcements, investigate the anomaly, and pave the way for the Primarch, but they were going in much better prepared than previous fleets. As well as the usual Astra Militarum regiments, Astartes strike forces, and Knight detachments, battle group Hephaestus was dominated by the Adeptus Mechanicus. Call had disseminated the details of the anomaly across his fleet, and the Tech Priests of Mars had deployed a huge number of archaeotech devices or experimental technologies in an attempt to overcome the stilling of the region. As they entered the Nexus, some of these modifications proved to be better than others, breaking the battle fleet up into a number of smaller fleets, but Call had planned for this. These smaller groups, operating under the command of a diverse range of tech magi, were designated either Aegis or Accretion fleets. The Aegis fleets, composed with the more human elements of the Crusade, the Militarum or Astartes forces, were tasked with locating the holdouts of Imperial defense and bolstering the survivors, while the Accretion fleets, with the heaviest Mechanicus presence, would concentrate on abandoned Necron sites and quarry worlds, seeking to harvest and process as much Blackstone material as they could find. Belisarius Call had studied the effects of the Necron nodal matrix and formulated a theory, which, of course, was 100% based on ancient teachings and definitely not new science. Honest, that would be heresy. Call had discovered that the Necron matrix was made from negatively charged noctilith, so if he could assemble his own megastructures out of positively charged noctilith, it's feeling a bit like a Star Trek episode, but let's go with it, and then build it into great toric constructions he named liminal abrasiers, and then tow them behind his ships, the Imperials might be able to disrupt the network. At least, that's what the ancient text said. The new battle group forced its way into the sector under the power of arcane and ancient devices. Within days, Aegis fleets had liberated 6 Imperial systems and regained contact with battle groups Orpheus and Calades, still holding Stornvor's grand fortification network, and they pushed on towards the warfront at Paradise. In the meantime, the Accretion fleets pushed further into Necron-held space, frequently coming under near-suicidal attack from Necron forces, but the attacks seemed strangely organized. Multiple times, overwhelming numbers of invaders would suddenly disappear. The attacks called off before they had a chance to overwhelm the defenders. And then Caul's own accretion fleet was attacked by 2 different dynastic armies at once, who immediately turned on each other instead of fighting the Mechanicus. Caul realized what was happening. The Necrons in the Nephilim subsector were engaged in a civil war. Imhotep the Stormlord was not a fan of the return of the Silent King, and not just because he'd stolen his former role as the main character of the Necrons. No, Imhotep thought that the shiny new metal bodies of the Necrons were great. He had no desire to return to the time of flesh, which was the stated goal of Zarek, so it was understandable when he decided to move against this grand plan. By the time Caul's fleet entered the Nexus, Imhotep's Sautek dynasty had already captured 3 full systems in the northeast of the region from the Silent King's Zarekan and allied Nephrek dynasties, and personally led incursions halfway across the sector, trying to disrupt this new nodal matrix. Generally, Sarek considered this challenge to his rule to be the greater of the 2 threats, and whenever Imhotep's forces interfered in the region, the Imperials suddenly found themselves ignored, which was great for the forces of the Imperium until they decided to prove how much of a threat they could actually be. On the world of Vergoit's Alphic, site of a major pylon node, Nemesaur Uthmek led Sarekan troops in battle against the Stormlord's forces, at which point Inquisitor Draxus returned to the region, this time with secret knowledge of how to destroy these gargantuan pylons. While the 2 Necron forces battled on the surface, Draxus led a strike force into the catacombs beneath the pylon and managed to topple it, disrupting the network and lifting the oppressive silence across that region. And this changed how Sarek the Silent King viewed these Imperial defenders. Previously, the humans in the region were seen as an upstart species, maybe suitable for some experimentation, or to be fought within the bounds of honourable battle. But the destruction of the Vergoit's pylon upgraded them in the eyes of the Silent King to a serious threat to his plans, and a species that needed to just be exterminated wherever they could be found. The war intensified as Zarek allowed his cryptex to unleash ancient and terrible devices, weapons whose use was officially outside the bounds of honourable Necron warfare, and in response, the tech magi of the Mechanicum unveiled barely understood gifts of the Omnissiah from the depths of their forges. Whole systems were tainted for generations or wiped from existence as eldritch forces were weaponized across the sector. And while he considered it a necessary decision, this wasn't the best political choice by the Silent King. With Imhotep studiously and deliberately adhering to all the ancient Necron codes of warfare, especially when fighting other Necrons, many cryptex and pharaons thought the deployment of such weapons by Sarek to be dishonourable and defected to the Stormlord's side. Sarek needed a swift victory to build confidence, regrouping forces from the Sarekan, Oruskar and Nyalak dynasties and starting another huge push towards Cherith, engaging again with the Stormvor network. And Caul had his own misgivings. Despite his warnings, incredibly dangerous technologies were being unleashed by eager magi across the sector with abandon, all in response to this stepping up of the war as Sarekan forces threw themselves against the Imperial Defense Network. And in one part of that network, matters came to a head. In the Skaran system, Magos Myrmidominus Gelf unleashed the ancient superweapon known as Chivalric's Constellation against a colossal Necron fleet. But he was unable to control this ancient swarm of defense satellites and unaware of their malign nature. After opening fire on both fleets, the constellation started reforming itself into ever more ancient and stylized energy glyphs, overlapping the nature of reality, until, with a series of explosions, it tore a breach in reality itself and a huge object emerged, tunneling itself into real space. In a diminishing aftershock of empiric energy, Wormwood had come. The demon planet of Vashtor the Archiphane had arrived in the Nephilim sector. The ancient webway tunneling engine at its core had allowed him to bypass the weakened nodal matrix, and the wanton acts of technical destruction had empowered him, allowing him to corrupt the Scar and Pylon. Waves of demon-possessed ships and Chaos attack craft emerged from the planetoid to attack both fleets as Necron forces pulled back, and the Silent King's massed new offensive was disrupted. And that's all we have. That's where we leave it for now. Caul's prototype liminal abrasers are almost ready, and Robert Guilliman is apparently hot on his heels. Vashtor the Archiphane, the demigod of spooky technology, is abroad in the sector, stalling the advance of Sarek on the Imperial Stormvor defense network, and Imhotep the Stormlord is launching fresh assaults to capitalize on the Silent King's failures. And of course, though we don't have many examples yet, there are apparently other Necron nodal matrices being established across the galaxy. It's a busy time to be a robot. Thanks for watching. And if you'd like to hear more about the history of 40k and how it's changed over time, well, there should be a video just coming up to the right. And if you'd like to support the channel, like, subscribe, or join the Patreon where you can get early videos and vote on what we do next in our book club. See ya!